Good evening, Ospreys. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff_2020, and home of the Screaming Ospreys. ScreamingOspreys.com is my website, maintained by the amazing Jumping Mouse, Catherine, our dear friend, who does so much work for promoting the page and the channel and helping us adapt since we lost our main channel. Catherine, we really appreciate all the work you do, and Jumping Mouse is your handle on Twitter. So, shout out to you. Another shout out tonight to the Neighborhood News Studio. I see they're continuing to progress in their production values, and their reach keeps growing. I'm very proud of you guys. You're doing a great job. And George Webb back at the Diplomatic Back Channel, which means I may have a chance to see him in person sometime soon. I hope. We have a show scheduled tomorrow morning for 10. I don't know if that'll be live or whether it'll be by Skype, but we will definitely be, I'm sorry, I misspoke, 11 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for McDuff and Webb. So this morning I was still overcome by my turkey infestation. I don't know if you guys have suffered from turkey overload before, but my brain wasn't working, so I thought, well, I'd just skip the Mindfields and do a talk. Well, I got some books in the mail again, and I wanted to go over these tonight. I think it's very important that hey, Cheryl Thompson, I'm glad to have you here, and happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone. Corky. Harry Bacharach, my friend, and fellow musician of great talent. Corky, are you the official greeter here on McDuff Channel? That's like when you walk into the store and hello, good evening. Well, good evening, everyone. Yeah, we did the turkey today too. We had to chop him up. Don't you hate to just have to chop up that big, fat, juicy turkey meat? Oh well, I'll shut up on that. 'Cause I also had a bunch of pie. I had this chocolate pie called a chess pie, and it's kind of like a brownie. It's very intense and sweet, but that didn't stop me. Yeah, I'm still just recovering. I admit it, recovering from overdoing a little bit of excess now and then can't be a bad thing. And we all needed to celebrate. We're still free, right? I mean, there's no drones hovering over my house monitoring my thoughts at this moment, as far as I know. You know, um, it still seems like they have to go to a good bit of trouble to hack into us. Not that they haven't done it to me. I'm sure that they've been watching me ever since I was a little kid because of their overriding interest in my dad. Um, so as I've been mentioning, I just have been inundated with books. It's my own fault. I order them. Okay, I'm like, wow, I gotta have that and gotta have that. The big theme that I've seen in the past few days is Andrew Carnegie. I've got no less than 3 books that I'm reading almost at the same time, and they are all about Andrew Carnegie. This one here, which I haven't read yet, but I was just skimming into it. Rockefeller Medicine Men, Medicine and Capitalism in America by Richard E. Brown. This is I want to go through a couple of these new books tonight. This is about what I've been calling Rockefeller medicine, and the idea of using surgery and pills as opposed to homeopathic medicine and individual clinical treatment. Introduction. The crisis in today's healthcare system is deeply rooted in the interwoven history of modern medicine and corporate capitalism. The major groups and forces that shaped the medical system sowed the seeds of the crisis we now face. The medical profession and other medical interest groups each tried to make medicine serve their own narrow economic and social interests. Foundations and other corporate class institutions insisted that medicine serve the needs of their corporate capitalist society. The dialectic of their common efforts and their clashes and the economic and political forces set in motion by their actions shaped the system as it grew. Out of this history emerged a medical system that poorly serves society's health needs. Yeah, and where does all that start? Well, it starts with Rockefeller and Carnegie. Now, also I picked up this book called None Dare Call It Treason, Book 8, and there's a series of like 11 or 12 books by Robert W. Pelton. And it follows up on my research that indicates that Henry Kissinger is the spy identified by Goleniowski. Goleniowski, the purported Polish colonel, defector, and somebody that we have been studying through the McDuff work of George Webb. And when he and I went to the National Archives and studied the Skarbek case and saw the connection to the Goleniowski case, then George, in his book, Let's Call Him McDuff, identifies how my dad's career develops from there. And the way the Russians, it appears some of them tried to defect to the FBI, but ended up in the hands of the CIA, and that, of course, was a bad thing. Well, let's hold off on that one, but that one is all about how Henry Kissinger is the guy that's been, spying and giving information away to the Soviets, for his whole career. Now, how often would I jump into three books by the same author all at once? The last time I did that was with William Engdahl's great books on the great, full system dominance, the Seeds of Destruction, and Oil Wars. I think I got 4 or 5 of his books. Well, I found Paul L. Williams to be similarly attractive to me because of his great book on Operation Gladio, the last book that I read on my channel, the last full book that I read on my channel before the channel was taken down. And I do hope to get all those books back up on my channel, but it's a lot of work. And right now, I'm more interested in staying on top of the current politics, the current science on COVID, the current election engineering, and so for that reason, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to go back and repost my old shows. Some people have offered to help with that, and I will take you up on it. Just give me a little bit more time to get through some of the more pressing things I need to do right now with regard to sharing these books, because that's just what it's about here on McDuff channel, is use the books that are already written. Why do I have to write a new book if it's already been written? So let me talk to you about these 3 new books that I got from Paul L. Williams and co-author Rodney Howard Brown in just a moment. Hey, Kathy Sue, what do you think of Kissinger et al. Being removed from the Defense Policy Board? I'm not familiar with the Defense Policy Board, but anytime we can get Kissinger off of anything, it's a good day. Good day. So thanks for alerting me to that. I'll have to study that. Gosh, I would love to think that somebody's actually taking Henry Kissinger out of the chain of command, but it's just like all the rest of them. He's somebody's pawn, and he'll be replaced. We're going to have to end this whole crazy system if we want to stop it. Okay, 3 books: Paul L. Williams and Rodney Howard Brown. The first one, The Killing of Uncle Sam: The Demise of the United States of America. And I haven't even read it. I haven't even opened it yet. But it falls in line with what I've been reading about. The idea that this country, which we've all thought was going to be the permanent hope of mankind for liberty and freedom for all, is dying. That our country is dying. The second one is called Killing the Planet: How a Financial Cartel Doomed Mankind. And this is just really sounds like what I think's happening, is that this financial cartel has had to increase the things that it includes in its financing projects, such as our air, water, freedom of movement, and now our health are becoming part of the financial calculations of these economists. Killing the planet is a byproduct of manipulating us through depriving us of air, water, agriculture, all the things that we naturally rely on as human beings, in order to make us completely dependent, those of us that they allow to survive, upon corporate largesse. We're fighting. Yes, we are fighting. California turned off power for today because of wind. Oh boy. Well, those are books that I've bought because they seem to be on the cusp of my research, and I'm looking for things that are going to carry me forward further. But this third book that I got from them today, which I just ordered a couple days ago, this is the brand new book from the same pair of authors, Rodney Howard Brown and Paul L. Williams, and this is the one I want to talk about tonight. This one is called The Phantom Virus: How an Unseen Enemy Shut Down the Planet. Can you see that? I know there's a little reflection on it. The Phantom Virus. How an Unseen Enemy Shut Down the Planet. So these guys, having proved themselves to me by the previous books I've read, I'm going to give them a lot of credibility and start off with their preface. Tolle lege. Tolle lege means, that's Latin, it means take this up and read it. Okay? So I will. An explanatory word to the reader. This book employs the methodology for conducting a criminal investigation as developed by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for his fictitious character Sherlock Holmes. It consists of the examination of 3 factors: motive, means, and opportunity, If a suspect of any crime lacks an adequate motive to commit the crime, the means to execute it, or the right opportunity to commit it, then that person can be absolved of guilt. In dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, we remain convinced that an outrageous crime has been committed against mankind by a criminal cabal of international bankers and business people. There you go. This is a book, okay? This is what they're afraid of when they talk about burning all the books, because if they get books like this out there and people read them, then their engineering plans are going to, end up like the greatest plans of mice and men. They often gang awry, says the great Masonic poet. By design, this book will show why the matter of population control and reduction became an obsession of the Rockefellers, Bill Gates, and other members of the moneyed elite. It will trace how these billionaires gained control of the world's legal, medical, pharmaceutical, educational, scientific, and religious institutions, along with the press, to gain control of world affairs. And finally, it will relate how the elite used a pandemic to corner the world's wealth and to establish a global socialized government over which they would wield complete control. To be sure, this book deals with a conspiracy, but the copious footnotes within these pages have been inserted to assure you that this is not conspiracy theory, but rather conspiracy fact. That we pray you have the temerity to verify for yourself. In the precious name of Jesus, Rodney Howard Brown and Paul L. Williams. And let me go ahead and read their first chapter. It's called A Matter of Engineering. This begins with a quote from Albert Camus, whose book, The Plague, I remember having to read in high school, but I don't remember a single thing about it. Maybe we ought to go back and read The Plague again, now that we're facing one. From Albert Camus, The Plague, 1947, quote, "Our townfolk were not more to blame than others. They forgot to be modest. That was all, and thought that everything still was possible for them, which presupposed that pestilences were impossible. They went on doing business, arranged for journeys, and formed views. How should they have given a thought to anything like plague, which rules out any future, cancels journeys, silences the exchange of views? They fancied themselves free, and no one will ever be free so long as there are pestilences." And now into the text by Paul Williams and Rodney Howard Brown. A pandemic that would reduce the world's excess population and make the global populace more receptive to international law was a cherished dream of the money cartel, including the Rockefellers, Bill and Melinda Gates, George Soros, and Ted Turner. In the past, members of the cartel had championed the causes of eugenics, birth control, and abortion on demand. They had developed vaccines that sterilized millions of women and genetically modified corn that acted as a spermicide. And we remember reading that in William Engdahl's Seeds of Destruction, right? By the second decade of the 21st century, the cartel had managed to convince hundreds of millions of people that overpopulation was the leading cause, not only of the depletion of the world's natural resources, including land and water, but also of climate change. They had convinced the public that overpopulation was to blame for the growing fear that carbon emissions were melting ice caps, raising sea levels, starving polar bears, and making the world an uninhabitable desert. 15 of every 16 humans must be eliminated. Speaking at the TED 2010 conference at Long Beach, California, Microsoft founder Bill Gates said, quote, "First, we got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%, unquote. Other members of the cartel believe that a 15% reduction is far too little, and that 15 of every 16 humans on planet Earth must be eliminated. Media mogul Ted Turner has argued that a 95% reduction of the world's population to a sustainable level of 225 to 300 million people would be, quote, ideal, unquote. But would the cartel actually make plans to achieve this goal? The scenario for the future of technology. The thought of reducing our global population by 95% seems incomprehensible, save for the Rockefeller Foundation's 2010 report titled, quote, Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. This report envisions the economic and political benefits that could be reaped by the spread of a global pandemic that infects 20% of the world's population and kills more than 8 million people within the course of several months. The pandemic, as imagined by the Rockefeller futurists, would produce a deadly effect on international and national economics, debilitating the airline, entertainment, and tourist industries, and disrupting the global supply chains so that certain commodities, including common disinfectants, would become increasingly valuable. Within each major city, once bustling shops and stores would be forced to close, and streets would be emptied of all pedestrians. The plague would disseminate the planet through disproportionate numbers of people, though disproportionate numbers of people would die in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus would spread like wildfire due to the absence of official containment protocols. But even in developed countries, containment would be a challenge. Creating the New World Order. If the Rockefeller Foundation's scenario were to become a reality, airtight rules and regulations would be imposed on all the citizens of the world by the managers of the world's economy in response to the pandemic. Body temperature checkpoints would be installed at the entrances to communal spaces, including airports, train stations, supermarkets, and churches. Anyone deemed a threat, even if he or she did not have the virus, would be placed in quarantine. Political functions would come to a screeching halt, and political protesters would not be allowed to assemble. This would bring into play a global government that would control all aspects of life on planet Earth. The world's citizens would be happy to surrender their personal freedoms for the sake of safety and stability, so managers of the global government would have boundless latitude to impose laws that serve their private interests. They could freely control fossil fuel emissions, institute a carbon tax, and maintain the use of green energy, and mandate the use of green energy. The strange simulation, and here we go with the Event 201 simulation. The strange simulation. On October 18, 2019, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, mounted Event 201, a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic. The simulation took place behind closed doors and was closed to the press. The participants, including government and UN officials, international bankers, and big business officials, noted that the countries of the world were ill-equipped to provide antiviral drugs and even sufficient supplies of hand sanitizers, face masks, and water purification chemicals. The shortages would increase as long as the virus continued to spread. Participants anticipated that a coronavirus would infect more than 3 million people in the course of 3 months, and that the pandemic would result...
Now strokes don't move, Club K
sorry.
with cranes.
Sorry about that. I hit a jingle button from the past. That was our great friend George Webb reciting one of our good friend JC's lines. Strokes don't move, Club K with cranes. All about the Strokes. Still, it's all about the Strokes. And George's latest updates us with the Strokes family and their incredible ability to control events from behind the scenes, make things happen with helicopters and all kinds of stuff. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, that kind of freaked me out. The simulation would result in the immediate closure of non-essential businesses. They also speculated that the event would cause the establishment of global rules and regulations and the monitoring of the media, including websites and social media, to curtail the dissemination of, quote, fake news, unquote. Well, I don't disseminate any fake news, guys, so don't worry about me. I'm good. You know, those major places, you know, CNN, Fox, WAPO, there's where you ought to be looking for the fake news. So it was a simulation. The simulation revolved around a scenario in which the entire population of the planet would be affected. During the initial months of the pandemic, the cumulative number of cases increased exponentially, doubling every week. As the numbers of cases and deaths climbed, the economic and societal consequences became increasingly severe. The scenario ended at the 18-month point with 65 million deaths. A slowdown in infections and deaths followed because of the decreasing number of susceptible people, but the pandemic would continue at some rate until an effective vaccine could be developed, or until 80 to 90% of the global population had been exposed. The World Health Organization. The group in Event 201 simulation agreed that a pandemic would fortify the importance of the World Health Organization, WHO, since all countries would need a central agency to supervise the measures undertaken by individual countries. No one noted that WHO is largely controlled by the Gates and Rockefeller families, who remain far and away the major donors to that organization. Regarding the simulation findings, infectious disease specialist Judy Stone, in an article for Forbes, wrote, quote, "The rise in nationalism and protectionism in various countries does not bode well. The best response to a pandemic requires global cooperation and a certain altruism to do what is best for the global community. That is essential for readiness," unquote. The Davos gathering. And look, we've got a Davos gathering coming up in January, January 21st, and Klaus Schwab has taken up the gauntlet. You know, he's come on to Twitter saying, "Hi guys, I'm here on Twitter. look forward to talking to you as we seduce you into our plans for, as described here in this book, to shut you down, stick you with needles, and minimize your importance. The Davos Gathering. The decision to launch the pandemic. Now, I don't think I've ever heard anybody, or at least I've never read the words in print before. The decision to launch the pandemic. I have to applaud the courage of these authors for saying that in print and publishing the book, which is available on Amazon. So, it's like they're not completely hiding it. I like to see them come out and challenge this, come out and tell me, tell us that they didn't decide to launch the pandemic. Come on now, it was an accident, right? The decision to launch the pandemic was made at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in January 2020. The WEF was attended by a cadre of international bankers and business people, including representatives of the Gates, Rockefeller, and Rothschild families, and Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, and Rothschild families, and Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the WHO. Throughout his career, Dr. Tedros has received funding from the Clinton Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. 2 weeks after the WEF conference in Davos, Dr. Tedros declared a public health emergency of international concern, even though at the time there was little evidence of a pandemic. The WEF conference had attracted many of the world's most prominent movers and shakers, including Bill Gates, George Soros, and 117 other billionaires, along with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and 53 other heads of state. President Donald Trump addressed the conference but was not a participant in the meetings. Other participants included U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, Britain's Prince Charles, David Solomon, CEO of Goldman Sachs, George Soros of Soros Fund Management, Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, and Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg. Also present were officials from every leading financial institution, including the Bank of America, Citibank, BlackRock, J.P. Morgan Chase, Lazard, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Bridgewater Associates, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and the South African Reserve Bank. Leading international businesses, including Microsoft, took part in the proceedings, and the pharmaceutical industry was well represented by executives from Bayer, Johnson & Johnson, and Merck. At the conclusion of the Davos summit, WEF officials announced an initiative for a coronavirus vaccine. This undertaking was to be spearheaded by the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, CEPI, an organization funded by the World Health Organization and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The announcement of this initiative was made barely 2 weeks after the coronavirus was identified by Chinese scientists and physicians on January 7th. The plague revealed. What caused the outbreak remained anyone's guess, but the virus was real and in some cases fatal. But the hype failed to reflect reality. By March 23rd, according to the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center, the COVID-19 virus had infected 372,563 people in a world population of 7.8 billion. killing 16,380, that is 4.3% of those infected, with 100,885 recovered and others highly likely to do so. These numbers did not account for the individuals who had contracted the virus but not reported it, thus indicating that the death rate from the disease may have been significantly lower than in the reported rate. Moreover, in Italy, where the greatest rate of COVID-19 occurred, 80% of the infected reportedly had suffered from 2 or more chronic diseases, and 90% of those who died were over 70 years old. Less than 1% of the deceased were healthy individuals without pre-existing chronic diseases. Entire nations remained in lockdown for fear of the plague, few media officials reported that the fear-mongering had little basis in reality, and that the global death toll from COVID-19 in the months since it was unleashed upon the planet was equal to the global death toll from the common influenza every 6.5 days. Still and all, the pandemic was achieving its goal of preparing the world for a vaccination program that would sharply decrease the number of inhabitants on planet Earth. And so we see the theme of this book is that it is not about the disease, it's about the vaccination program. And I think that's really where we need to look, because of the existing continuing scientific support from these foundations, like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, the Carnegie Institution of Washington, and so many others that are just basically rip-off agencies to take our tax dollars and turn them into these scientific pseudoscience projects to benefit the technological elite as they grind us down into nothingness. Well, Kimberly Kay, you're right. That's why I'm reading it tonight. As I say, I mean, they're probably, if they take down my channel, I'll start another channel. But it's quite a large burden that they can impose on you. But I don't really think that I have a choice. I have to get this information out. And I want you to spread it. And I want people to read this book. Now, the book now goes back through the history that I've been reading now for 2 years about these Malthusian Nazis. The People Problem, Chapter 2. When from the lowness of organization the ability to contend with external danger is small, there must be great fertility to compensate for the consequent mortality, otherwise the race must die out. When, on the contrary, high endowments give much capacity for self-preservation, a correspondingly low degree of fertility is requisite, lest the rate of multiplication should outrun the supply of food. So said Herbert Spencer in The Principles of Biology, 1867. This is Spencer, okay, the famous Spencer of Galton, Spencer, and Malthus. Throughout his life, John D. Rockefeller, Jr., also known as Jr., remained obsessed with the matter of population control and reduction. His obsession sprang from his exposure as a student at Brown University to the thought of Thomas Malthus, a British political economist. Malthus took note of the dramatic increase in the population of England, which soared from 8.3 million in 1801 to 16.5 million in 1830. Future population growth, Malthus maintained, would result in food shortages and widespread disease and famine. Farmers, he insisted, would be hard-pressed to raise enough food and grow enough produce to feed the growing masses. To prove his point, he applied the quotient of maximum food production to maximum population growth. The result was disaster. Young Rockefeller's mentor, the leading proponent of the Malthusian theory at Brown University, was Elisha Benjamin Andrews, a one-eyed, larger-than-life Civil War veteran and noted economist who penned such works as An Honest Dollar and Wealth and Moral Law. Andrews believed that America would soon become the primary victim of overpopulation. The specter of starvation hovered over the country, he alleged, because of the waves of immigrants that were inundating the shores of the land of the free and the home of the brave. Between 1847 and 57, more than 200,000 immigrants had arrived in America. The newcomers were primarily from Britain, southwest Germany, and after the Great Famine of 1846 from Ireland. The next wave, bridging the years from the end of the Civil War to the turn of the century, brought millions more from Britain, Germany, Ireland, Sweden, Norway, and Eastern Europe. In the 15 of the 35 years between 1865 and 1900, the annual influx went beyond 400,000, with more than 800,000 arriving in 1882 alone. I'm going to skip to the next little section because you and I, we're familiar with this material. I'm just going through it because it's summarized very well here. The pseudoscience of eugenics. Thanks to Andrews, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was also exposed to the writings of Sir Francis Galton, a highly respected Victorian scientist. Galton, after reading Darwin's Origin of the Species, concluded that the human race could be elevated through selective breeding. Based on this belief, he developed a new field of pseudoscience research that he called eugenics, meaning well-born. In his writings, Galton called upon healthy and intelligent couples to produce more children so that the human race, which mostly consisted of individuals with the intelligence level of gibbon apes, could be refined and improved. Of course, implementing this measure would require a precipitous decline in the birth rate of the poor, the stupid, and the needy. Well, I would like to read this entire book to you, but I'm not going to because it's in many ways a great summary of a number of the books I've already read, including the Seeds of Destruction by William Engdahl and The Guarded Gate, whose author's name I forget, but it's sorry, I'll just have to find out. Can't remember the man's name. But a great book called The Guarded Gate came out last year. Worth reading if you haven't had a chance to listen to my reading of it, or otherwise get yourself a copy. Well, I don't want to, again, make this whole show tonight about this one book, but let me go ahead and read another later chapter from the book. Okay, here's the other one that I think is timely, courageous, and essential. This is chapter 23 on page 253 of the new book, The Phantom Virus by Rodney Howard Brown and Paul L. Williams, published by River Publishing, 2020. It's a brand new book, just a couple months old. Chronology of the creation of COVID-19. This is chapter 23. According to UWI, sources in the medical industry engaged in the study of COVID-19, the specific features of the novel coronavirus, that is, rapid mutation, gradual weakening, etc., show that it is synthetic, made in the laboratory. Survivors have problems with the lungs, and the genome has the potential to develop into cancer. Thus, the real danger for the survivors will come in the future. In theory, the new coronavirus is quite suitable as a biological weapon. The virus is respiratory, meaning it spreads effectively. It has a long incubation period. The coronavirus takes control of the first stages of the infection. It can suppress the immune response in the first stages. When the number of copies exceeds a certain level, an immunity is triggered, but already as a systemic immune response. This response is so strong that it leads to lung damage. The immune system gives such a strong answer that in lungs is formed edema. Their vital volume is reduced to a minimum, making it impossible for the victim to breathe. And that is a quote from Is COVID-19 an American Bioweapon? Printed by United World International on March 22nd, 2020. It's early on. Now, let's go back to in November of 2002 and go forward from there. In November 2002, the War on Terror was raging. American troops were combing the caves of Afghanistan in search of Osama bin Laden and his band of jihadis. News was circulating that plans were underway by Al-Qaeda to launch a radiological or biological attack on American soil. The war had turned ugly. The United States had dropped nuclear bombs on Tora Bora, where they believed bin Laden had created an elaborate mountain fortress. The Patriot Act was firmly in place, and the terror level remained orange in every major U.S. city. Within this toxic environment, the U.S. military began to develop new biological weapons for use against the Mujahideen. Some of the attendant research was conducted at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, UNC, under the supervision of epidemiology/microbiology professor Ralph Baric, B-A-R-I-C. The focus of the research was to develop a gain of function within a virus. The process consisted of altering existing pathogens so that they would be immune from existing vaccines and capable of spreading from person to person. On October 28, 2003, Baric and his colleagues published a paper that related how they had managed to create a synthetic clone of a natural coronavirus. I think that's very significant, a synthetic clone of a natural coronavirus. It read in part, quote, using a panel of contiguous cDNAs, and I don't know why that little c before DNA, that span the entire genome, we have assembled a full-length cDNA of the SARS-CoV Urbani strain, and have rescued molecularly cloned SARS viruses, parentheses, infectious clone SARS-CoV, that contained the expected marker mutations inserted into the component clones. Recombinant viruses replicated as efficiently as WT virus, and both were inhibited by treatment with the cysteine, cysteine, proteinase inhibitor. Availability of a SARS-CoV full-length cDNA provides a template for manipulation of this vital genome. allowing for the rapid and rational development and testing of candidate vaccines and therapeutics against this important human pathogen. This paper appeared 9 months after the breakout of a viral respiratory disease known as SARS in the Chinese province of Guangdong. On April 22, 2020, Yuri Dagan commented on this development, quote, "The speed of the Barrick Group illustrates how quickly a qualified team of virologists can create a synthetic clone from a natural virus, and therefore make genetic modifications to it. Moreover, that was back in 2003. Today, a qualified laboratory can repeat those steps in a matter of weeks. In fact, two just did. The Swiss have created a synthetic clone of CoV-2 in under a month, while it took the Galveston BSL-4 lab less than 2 months to do so." Thanks, Deborah. Complimentary DNA. Compliments to your DNA, Deborah. Appreciate it. Deborah Johnson, very helpful at the charrettes. She's a great researcher and a great colleague. Thanks, Deborah. December 2005. The fact that scientists couldn't create a synthetic coronavirus is the fact that scientists could create a synthetic coronavirus in accordance with the protocols of gain of function sparked liability concerns that such a man-made virus could escape from a laboratory with disastrous effects. Federal legislators took precautions to protect any laboratory and scientist involved with biochemical research from legal action. In December 2005, Congress passed the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act to provide liability immunity related to the manufacture, testing, development, distribution, administration, and use of medical countermeasures against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear agents of terrorism, epidemics, and pandemics. In January 2006, concerns about a pandemic were heightened by the outbreak of the avian flu. Richard Hatchett and Carter Mecker, two federal physicians, came up with the idea that a virus could be contained by social distancing and the wearing of face masks. In, quote, "targeted social distancing designs for pandemic influenza," posted on the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention website from the Emerging Infectious Diseases Journal, following Hatchett and Mecker's lead, said that the threat of pandemic should be met by the totalitarian lockdown of all aspects of society. They wrote, quote, "Implementation of social distancing strategies is challenging. They likely must be imposed for the duration of the local epidemic and possibly until a strain-specific vaccine is developed and distributed. If compliance with the strategy is high over the period, an epidemic within a community can be averted. However, if neighboring communities do not also use these interventions, infected neighbors will continue to introduce influenza and prolong the local epidemic, albeit at a depressed level more easily accommodated by healthcare systems." This idea was met with fierce opposition from Dr. D.A. Henderson, who has been credited with ridding the world of smallpox. In an article titled "Disease Mitigation Measures in the Control of Pandemic Influenza," Henderson wrote, "Experience has shown that communities faced with epidemics or other adverse effects respond best and with the least anxiety when the normal social functioning of the community is least disrupted. Strong political and public health leadership to provide reassurance and to ensure that needed medical care services are provided are critical elements. If either is seen to be less than optimal, a manageable epidemic could move toward catastrophe. The Bush administration ultimately sided with Hatchett, Metcher, and the proponents of social distancing and shutdowns. This policy would become the basis for government planning and would be used extensively in exercises and simulations employed to prepare for pandemics. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation shelled out $10 billion to the World Health Organization and announced that the years 2010 to 2020 would be the decade of vaccines. In May of 2010, the Rockefeller Foundation published a report titled Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. The pandemic, as imagined by the Rockefeller futurists, will produce a deadly effect on international and national economics, debilitating the airline, entertainment, and tourist industries, and disrupting the global supply chains so that certain commodities, including common disinfectants, would become increasingly valuable. Within every major city, once bustling shops and stores will be forced to close, and streets are emptied of all pedestrians. The pandemic will bring into play a global government that will control all aspects of life on Earth. The citizens of the world will be happy to surrender their personal freedoms for the sake of safety and stability. For this reason, the managers of the global government will have boundless latitude to impose laws that serve their private interests. On May 24, 2012, the 194 member states of the World Health Assembly endorsed the Global Vaccine Action Plan. The plan was steered by the Gates Foundation in partnership with the WHO, UNICEF, and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, which remains under the control and direction of Dr. Anthony Fauci, one of the 5 members of the GVAP Leadership Council. Under orders from President Obama in October 2014, the National Institutes of Health halted federal funding for gain-of-function research. The curtailment of funding applies to any new projects that may be reasonably anticipated to confer attributes to influenza, MERS, or SARS viruses, such that the virus would have enhanced pathogenicity and or transmissibility in mammals via the respiratory route. The White House also encouraged those currently conducting this type of work to voluntarily pause their research while risks and benefits are being released. January 2015, NIAID under Fauci awarded a 5-year, $3.7 million grant to EcoHealth Alliance to conduct gain-of-function studies under the risk of bat coronavirus emergencies. 10% of the award goes to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which collects on-the-ground samples and conducted the initial analysis. The allocation was made from a division of the NIH, even though Obama's order against funding gain-of-function research remained in place. Dr. Ralph Barrick of the University of North Carolina and Zhengli Shi of the Wuhan Institute, among others, wrote an article for Nature Medicine in which they described their creation of a synthetic, chimerical, and that means not happening in nature, coronavirus. In their description of the achievement, this is 2015 now, the authors inserted this cautionary note, quote, "The data and restrictions represent a crossroads of GOF research. The potential to prepare for and mitigate future outbreaks must be weighed against the risk of creating more dangerous pathogens. In developing policies moving forward, it is important to consider the value of the data generated by these studies and whether these types of chimeric virus studies warrant further investigation versus the inherent risks involved." The lion's share of the funding for this research was provided by USAID, the CIA-linked funder of bioweapons research facilities around the world. And just to give you the footnote on that, it's Gordon Duff. And you know, Gordon Duff is Veterans Today publisher and a noted authority on much of this. Quote, "The nasty truth about COVID-19 in New Eastern Outlook, dated March 25th, 2020. The Nasty Truth About COVID-19 by Gordon Duff." Okay? On December 19th, 2017, the federal ban on gain-of-function research was lifted. This is not good news for many in the scientific community. Epidemiologist Mark Lipsitch of Harvard said this, the type of gain-of-function experiments endorsed by Dr. Fauci's NIAID have done almost nothing to improve our preparedness for pandemics and yet risked creating an accidental pandemic. January 2019, NIAID awarded a 6-year renewal grant of $3.7 million to Eco Health Alliance and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That renewal received a really extremely high priority for funding. At the time, researchers at the Wuhan Institute were still working in close collaboration with Dr. Barrick and the University of North Carolina. August 2019, SEC records revealed that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation owns 5.3 million shares of Crown Castle International Corporation. Crown Castle, which has become the foundation's second largest tech holding after Microsoft, dominates ownership of 5G infrastructure throughout the U.S., including cell towers, small cell nodes, and fiber. October 2019, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, mounted Event 201, a simulation of a coronavirus pandemic. The simulation took place behind closed doors and was closed to the press. They also speculated that the event would cause the establishment of global rules and regulations and the monitoring of the media, including websites and social media, to curtail the dissemination of, quote, fake news. December 2019, researchers at MIT announced the development of a novel way to record a patient's vaccination history using smartphone-readable nanocrystals called quantum dots embedded in the skin using microneedles. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded this work. Chinese officials informed the WHO of a cluster of mysterious pneumonia cases in December of 2019. Later, the South China Morning Post reported that it can trace the first case back to November 17th. January 2020. The WHO declared the coronavirus outbreak a global health emergency. Thus, a gain-of-function virus was brought into being by U.S. scientists for use as a biological weapon in the ongoing war on terror. But it came to serve a larger and more sinister purpose. It represented the means by which a cabal of billionaires could bring about the collapse of the world's economy and the massive transference of wealth into the pharmaceutical businesses. The virus, by design, would necessitate the formation not of a cure, but rather of a vaccine. And the new pharmaceutical cocktails would contain more than an antidote against the man-made disease, and even more than the long-sought means of winnowing the world's population. The worldwide vaccine campaign under the direction of Bill Gates and company would result in the implementation of nanochips within every inhabitant of planet Earth so that they could be monitored and controlled. These chips would allow the cabal to create a digital world economy with digital bank accounts and digital wallets for people with digital identifications. These people would live and die under 5G grids in digital prisons from which there would be no means of escape. Well, I see I've gone past 9 o'clock, so I think I'll stop here. No means of escape, the mark of the beast, and all of this from a synthetic virus created by the United States for use in the war on terror. Thus say our authors, Paul L. Williams and Rodney Howard Brown, tonight in their brand new book, The Phantom Virus, How an Unseen Enemy Shut Down the Planet. All right, well, tonight we'll be moving over to Mark Kulak's channel, Housatonic Live, at 10 o'clock tonight, I think, if that's correct, Kathy. Yeah. All right, and everybody have a great evening. I'll talk to you soon. Tomorrow morning, scheduled with George Webb, so we'll see you then.